Hey everybody, it's Aunt BB still. It's still Monday, June 15th, 2020. I'm Barb Hammer. So I did a quick video just to explain that raw video that I had uploaded about Jason Lewis and his arrest and Black Lives Matter, which is a orchestrated kind of corporate protest movement, not for, and the ultimate goal is not what people involved really want. Make something, the police brutality that is going on in the U.S. will get much worse because the plan to the demands to defund or abolish the police force will make the police less accountable, privatized. There might even be National Guard brought in. Things are really bad, and it's part of this constantly. I've said in previous videos, it's all very familiar. It's like it's a color revolution. It's made to look like a popular uprising, but as they say, the revolution will not be televised, and all of this is getting way too much mainstream media attention, with huge crowds being encouraged to come out. So there are some people pay like Jason Lewis to organize and use very inflammatory language, and they're agents provocateurs, being violent. And previous videos, I've explained that I realized what was going on because I've seen this in Hong Kong and watching other color revolutions too, mainly in Hong Kong since last year. So as Scott Creighton on his Church Dog 42 channel, he's talked about this unconventional warfare, sometimes called irregular warfare. And he cited this pocket guide, and I've been going through it and kind of exploring it more, looking at other things. But I realize this is all very familiar. So the COVID, what I call a mercavirus psyop, psychological operation, is to smear China, blame China, and lockdowns, control people, change everything, destroy the economy. And I've said the chickens have come home to roost, and I think even Scott said that the chickens have come home to roost, and they certainly have. So the same things that they do in other countries with these color revolutions, regime change operations, they're doing in the U.S. in the West now. So part of this is the Black Lives Matter movement, which I've talked about some. Anyway, so there's a lot of things. I just I just want to kind of skim the surface of some things. But I realized I had touched upon this last year in this video about a figure, very interesting figure named Michael Pillsbury. And I said he's the brains behind the CIA, Hong Kong riots, and irregular warfare. Well, now it's terrorism. At first I'd say protests, and then riots, and now it's outright terrorism. And that is how unconventional warfare, it eventually becomes terrorism. And Scott has explained that. It just, that goes through different steps. And so this is a familiar topic for me. And this figure, Michael Pillsbury, is connected to this whole sort of operation. So I think I'll just read my show notes here. Yeah, so I mentioned irregular. Dr. Michael Pillsbury, a former Reagan administration official, admitted on Fox News that the USA is responsible for the Hong Kong protests, specifically the 2014 Umbrella Revolution at the time. It's safe to say that the same is true in the current riots, which follow the same pattern of increasing violence. Pillsbury was in charge of the Reagan Doctrine of covert action. That's irregular warfare, unconventional warfare. At the Department of Defense in the 1980s, especially aid to the USA's Mujahideen proxies against Soviet forces in Afghanistan. At the same time, he helped create the National Endowment for Democracy. the NED, which is the NGO used as a CIA cover for destabilization campaigns or regime change operations, color revolutions, such as in Hong Kong against China. And I don't remember this. I said he probably masterminded the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests. Well, I know now Gene Sharp was involved. Michael Pillsbury, he might very well have been involved in other similar operations in the Soviet bloc. I've talked about those revolutions in the late 80s that brought down all the communist governments in Eastern Europe, and then the Soviet Union then collapsed. Anyway, so the Reagan administration also sponsored the Contras in Nicaragua against the leftist Sandinista government there. Pillsbury probably played a part in that operation too. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Pillsbury has worked on this type of irregular warfare ever since Reagan was president, and continued his work when George H.W. Bush Sr. was in office too. He returned to Department of Defense as a consultant when George W. Bush was president, and is now considered one of Trump's top advisors on China. Because of Pillsbury's academic background, I would call him Trump's ideas guy, or the brains behind the USA's current policy on China. So he's with the Hudson Institute, if I recall correctly. Yeah, so this is a familiar topic for me. But as Scott is pointing out, they're using it against people in the U.S. now. And in these operations, there's steps, and they infiltrate, and they encourage people who don't know what's going on to come out and protest. So most people, they don't know, and they take legitimate grievances, and they ramp up the discontent and the tension. And yeah, so Scott, this is the document he cited. I've gone through it, some of it. I'm going through, I look up things as I'm going through it. So very interesting. So he's talked about these charts, and he's talked about how there are operations where they're propping up governments, like ISIS was used to keep U.S. troops in Iraq to against an insurgency, ISIS. And then ISIS was used to in the regime change operation against the Assad government in Syria then. And it's kind of interesting what's going on in the U.S. I saw there's a Black Lives movement that's got protests organized for around the White House for this weekend. And part of their demands are for Trump to step down. And, I think there's been some, sort of I don't know, it's like a boiling frog. So I think we are seeing the culmination of Reagan's neoliberalism. And in this last phase, I think this began in 2016, if not sooner. I mean, it's all, the neoliberalism has been increasing over the years, and every president has the same economic policy: neoliberalism, privatization of government, gutting public services, deregulation. Anyway, so these are the steps, the clandestine and then the overt. And there's a lot involved here. And I realized there's this, what they do. I remember from the video I talked about the Romanian Revolution in 1989. And what they do is they make things so bad that people are desperate to get out of how horrible the situation is. And that's what they're doing now. So people they're willing to accept anything to get out of all the tension and the violence and the, unemployment. They want to go back to work. They want some financial help. So people will be willing to accept everything. That's the thing that I learned from the Romanian Revolution. the violence and everything just gets so bad, people are willing to accept anything. Um, yeah, so those are the steps. Anyway, so along those lines of unconventional warfare and irregular warfare, um, so as I've been talking about color revolutions, and a lot of people, they don't understand what a color revolution is, and I just simply say it's this regime change operation that was started. Like there were forms of it that existed as early as I guess the when Mossadegh was overthrown in I guess 1953 in Iran, and that was kind of like a color revolution. So it was made to look like a popular uprising to overthrow Mossadegh, who was elected, and he nationalized the oil industry in Iran, and British Petroleum got kicked out. Um, and so they had to overthrow him, and they stalled the Shah of Iran. But it was really not until the 1980s that this concept of color revolution really began. And the color thing, people think there's always like a color, and they say, well, what color is this revolution? No, it's not necessarily a color, although that's how it kind of started. So it mentions here in the Philippines in 1986, there was a people power revolution. It was called the Yellow Revolution. So there often are colors, but color revolutions are more about imagery. And I've also seen, the color of blood is very important. Yes, they are not peaceful. They are not peaceful. No, they are portrayed as such, but they are not. Um, so they get names. So there's Ukraine in 2004 had the Orange Revolution, but it's sometimes this Yugoslavia 20 years ago was the bulldozer revolution. So there's always some image or something that like Tiananmen Square. So everybody remembers Tangman, but it doesn't have a name. We just know Tiananmen Square, so it never got a name like that. In Hong Kong, the 2014 Umbrella Revolution, because the yellow umbrella is very symbolic. Georgia had a Rose Revolution. Iran in 2009 had the Green Revolution. So all these, this is just, I know this is Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is good for like a quick reference, but don't, sometimes you have to take some of this with a grain of salt. So, yeah, the Velvet Revolution, that was portrayed as a peaceful revolution in Czechoslovakia in 1989 when all the Soviet bloc was falling apart. So that's color revolution. I can always tell because you'll see huge crowds. Mainstream media covers them. There's often ridiculous dancing. It's very can be festive, portrayed as festive, people dancing, and you see that with the ridiculous COVID, the nurses and the medical staff producing music videos, and same thing with these police brutality protests, and even get the police to dance, and it's just ridiculous. But that's very common in color revolutions, music videos, music, dancing, art. Yeah, so that's color revolution. So Scott was talking about unconventional warfare. So color revolutions are a type of they go hand in hand with unconventional warfare a lot of times. So yeah, he's talked a lot about this. Winning hearts and minds. You'll hear that. Yeah, winning hearts and minds. Yeah, that's like or else. Yeah, so there's a lot of similar terminology connected to unconventional warfare or irregular warfare. I've come across a number of different things. So everybody, I realize, in alternative media, they'll say, "Oh, well, we're anti-war, we're anti-imperialist," and it's all very superficial. Yeah, so what? Wow, what a claim! I'm anti-war, big deal. So it's everybody understands hard power So hard power is the use of military and economic means to influence the behavior or interests of other political bodies. Yeah, hard power. So that's brute force or military, like economic blockades, I guess, would be a form of hard power. Um, yeah, I like this how, according to Joseph Nye, hard power involves the ability to use the carrots and sticks of economic and military might to make others follow your will. Yeah, it's more like the sticks though. It's not carrots. No, I don't know why. It's just sticks. Um, yeah. Anyway, hard power. So everybody seems to understand hard power. And that's what you'll hear in most of the alternative media. They're talking about hard power. So it's not hard to figure that one out. And even when they talk about, so Scott mentioned, Hillary Clinton refers to these color revolutions and unconventional warfare as soft power, and which is really um, not accurate at all. It's not soft at all. So I think I've mentioned in previous videos that soft power, um, they have different connotations in the East than in the West. And by the East, I mean China, Asia. So the Chinese will talk about soft power. And I know for the Chinese, it's like the carrot. So they just, deal with other countries fairly, and they try to present themselves in a positive light, and they try to be honest brokers in dealing with countries. So that's the Chinese form of soft power is the carrot. It really is the carrot for the Chinese. So you offer people, countries, good deals, business deals, loans that are not exploiting the other country, like the IMF imposing austerity. They don't place conditions, and the Chinese government often forgives debt. If a country can't pay back a debt, the Chinese government, they just forgive the debt. But soft power for the US and the West is the stick. And that's what Hillary Clinton was talking about. Yeah. So here's Joseph Nye again. So it's a very distorted kind of description of soft power, I think. It's more so the US sort of thinks of soft power as saying, oh, but we represent democracy and freedom and human rights. But that's not what these countries get, especially in the Middle East and Latin America. So that's, yeah, very different between the East and the West, the idea of soft power. Okay, so some alternative media on the left will kind of talk about regime change operations, but I've noticed this is interesting. So Max Blumenthal's Gray Zone, they will talk about regime change operations or color revolutions, very bloody ones in Latin America, but they always portray it as, local fascists are taking over and they have U.S. backing. No, when the regime change operations are the U.S., they are U.S. coups, but the goal of Max Blumenthal's Gray Zone is to kind of deflect blame away from the U.S., kind of distract a little bit, and not sort of distract people so that they're not making a connection between operations in Venezuela and Nicaragua, and as they overthrew Evo Morales' government in Bolivia. So they don't want you to make that connection because Max Blumenthal's outfit is disinformation. It's got connections to Western intelligence, intel community, State Department, often tied to intel. And it's what's interesting is the gray zone. That term is an unconventional warfare term. So the gray zone is the area between, I guess, peace and warfare. So it's the gray zone. So it's kind of interesting that Max Blumenthal's outlet has that unconventional warfare term. Yes. So Scott mentioned that Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton, they and their cronies, like I think Chris Hedges' son, they go in and they kind of they pretend that they're supportive of the leftist governments, like in Nicaragua and Venezuela. They pretend, but they're really kind of gathering information, making connections, infiltrating, and they're just kind of weasels. They're in there. And most people who follow their work, a lot of it's very good information. I mean, that's the problem with disinformation. You're going to get some good information, but you have to be able to read between the lines and kind of understand the angles that they're presenting. So Max Blumenthal, his gray zone outfit, they're pretty, they like to brag they're anti-imperialist and like to throw around a lot of jargon like radical, we're anti-hegemonic and I don't know, it's kind of ridiculous. But anyway, they don't really explain soft power that well and try to deflect blame from the US. Another term since last year I've stumbled upon is something called sharp power. So this is a term that the CIA's main NGO, the National Endowment for Democracy, coined this term sharp power. And I just laughed when I first stumbled upon it on the NED's website. And I immediately thought of a CIA military academic, Gene Sharp, the godfather of the color revolution. So sharp power. But they use this. So there was an article in Foreign Affairs magazine. So it's sharp power they describe as aggressive and subversive policies employed by authoritarian governments as a projection of state power in democratic countries. Policies that cannot be described as either hard power or soft power. Okay. So they point to like Russia Today, RT, and the Chinese government that have the Confucius Institute, which has, it's sort of, I guess it teaches Chinese. And I don't know if there are other subjects. I think it's mainly to teach Chinese around the world. So they consider this really nefarious. So the NED portrays RT and other media outlets, I guess like Chinese media too, and the Confucius Institute are considered dangerous or something. I don't know. So the NED claims that these countries are not necessarily seeking to win hearts and minds. The common frame of reference for soft power efforts, but they are surely seeking to manipulate their target audiences by distorting the information that reaches them. Now, that is the height of hypocrisy because the Western media, it's just full of just intelligence propaganda. I mean, you just have to assume that they're lying about Russia and China and Iran. And so they're claiming this is what Russia and China do instead. So I'm going to talk about sharp power again in another video. I just want to kind of go through these different types of power. Another one that I've recently come across, and this one has a very direct connection to Hong Kong. So smart power. And I stumbled upon this term because of this fellow, Christian Whiten, and I don't have a picture of him here, or maybe no, that's a dead link. So he was in Hong Kong last year meeting with, I think Jimmy Lai and maybe Martin Lee and some of the other regime change ringleaders in Hong Kong. Yeah, so he is so he worked in the George W. Bush administration. So he's been closely involved in what's going on in Hong Kong. And he even went there. So his thing is smart power. So he defines it as the neglected tools of statecraft that lie between diplomacy and outright war. So I consider this, he's talking about irregular warfare again, unconventional warfare, color revolutions. So smart power, that's his thing. And he has a book that he wrote about smart power. Yeah, so he thinks the US is lacking in smart power. So he draws heavily from the Cold War. So he's, invoking the Cold War. And so he says the primary threats right now are Iran, China, and Islamism. Okay. So that reminds me of Steve Bannon, who resurrected the Committee on the Present Danger, China. And he has said that China and Islam, the two main threats to Western civilization. Yeah, so all very familiar with this stuff. So smart power. So anyway, I just realized, after Scott had talked about irregular warfare, unconventional warfare, that I had talked about this in connection with Hong Kong and Michael Pillsbury. And they are using this. The chickens have indeed come home to roost. They're using this against us in the West and the US. And it's not good. And he says it's interesting. He was saying that, they haven't been very successful in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and elsewhere. So they're using it against us now. Yeah. So these color revolutions, irregular warfare, unconventional warfare is being used against us. And things are definitely going to get worse. So lots of terms here: unconventional warfare, color revolution, hard power, soft power, sharp power, and smart power. Anyway, so I guess that's it for now. I just, was making connections with what I've learned since last year. And I think I became, I have to thank Scott for making me become aware of irregular warfare and what they were doing in Hong Kong. So I'm learning, and I've been going through this document and looking up more things. Anyway, I guess that's it for now. Let me just check here. Wait a minute. I had written down some things. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the color revolution. Yeah, maybe I should mention. No. Yeah, the McG resistance. Yeah, since 2016, the Muck resistance against Trump. That's kind of like it was the Women's March. That's kind of like a color revolution. So this color revolution thing, I think, has been going on since 2016, if not sooner. And last year I kind of was looking at all these protests against Trump and the impeachment protests, and I realized that these look kind of like color revolutions. So yeah, this has been going on for a while, but it's just gotten really worse with the COVID lockdowns and the Black Lives Matter protests. So so this has been going on for a while. It's just been building up, and we're like a boiling frog, and it's been getting worse and worse since Reagan started to introduce neoliberal economic policy. And this is what it's come to. Anyway, sorry about that, but that's it for now, I guess. And I want to talk more about this sharp power and smart power in a future video in connection with Hong Kong, China, and what's going on in the US and the West now. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your patience. And I will talk to you again soon. Bye.